Welcome to another edition of Arts and Ideas. Today we're taking you along to the Worcester Art Museum, a world-class institution in central Massachusetts that spans 50 centuries of art, from ancient Egypt to the contemporary art scene. The Worcester Art Museum, affectionately known as WAM, is the second largest museum in New England. It was founded in 1896, and its collections include more than 35,000 items. Covering the walls and floor of the great Renaissance court are the famous Roman mosaics from ancient Antioch in Syria, which were excavated by the Worcester Art Museum and other institutions and brought to the museum in the 1930s. Hello again, I'm Sue Swinand. I am delighted to have Jim Welu here today as my guest at the Worcester Art Museum, and I'm delighted to be your guest. Thank you so much for having us today.
My pleasure.
I know you have a passion for speaking about art and speaking about the Worcester Art Museum, but I thought we'd start off today asking you some questions about your beginning history, where, some things from how you became interested in art.
Well, probably that passion about the art museum, about art, is because the art has always been a part of my life. Even my parents say that when I was 3 years old, I was the artist in the family, and I actually held the crayons different than my other brothers and sisters. Says my mother.
And took great pride in your coloring.
Oh yes. And I was very fortunate that my parents really fostered my natural talent in art, as did all my siblings, my teachers. They really saw that I was very serious about being an artist. And that's something that I'm very interested in, of course, today at the Art Museum, making sure we foster the next generation of artists.
Yeah.
But I had that respect for my colleagues right early on, and you feel good about it. It's like, then I have a responsibility. I'm not going to disappoint them.
Well, you have a gift, and you then get the idea that you could share that gift and do something with it.
Yes, no, it's true. And I'm sure my parents, I know they worried about how I would make a living, but they never said that to me because they knew that would just tear me apart. That, art was my life. I drew my way through school. I did well academically, but I really drew my way through school.
And where did you go to school?
I grew up in Dubuque, Iowa, and I started, as I said, like any young artist, probably like you as well, did all the art projects in school.
All the bulletin boards.
All the bulletin boards, right. And I took art lessons after school from a nun in one of the girls' academies across the street from the school I went to. And then when I went to high school, I went to a boys' academy for 1 year, and there was no art. And my parents still always talk about that I was like a lost soul.
No kidding.
Right. Huh. And then that academy closed, and we had a central school that we all went to, and then there was a great art department. And that art teacher really had a big effect on my life because she knew I did well academically, and all I wanted to do was go to art school. I wanted to go to Minneapolis or Chicago.
It's an interesting thing, though. I think the academics are a necessary grounding for the pursuit of art today.
Absolutely, absolutely important, really. And she knew that, too. And so she said, why don't you just take your artwork to the nearby college, which was only 2 blocks from my home, to see if I could get a scholarship. And indeed I did. I got a $50 scholarship. Now, that's a small amount of money today.
It was enough.
But it was enough to tip the scales to go to this private school, a liberal arts college. So I had a great liberal arts education. And then from there, and this is why she was so important in my life, I got fellowships and scholarships all the way through my PhD.
And you went to Notre Dame?
I did. I got my
MFA?
Master of Fine Arts there.
Yeah?
And then I wanted to teach. I taught 1 semester at Notre Dame. And then I taught in a small college, about 500 students for 2 years, and had to teach some art history, and fell in love with that. Also,
but he was originally trained as a painter, and taught studio arts when you were at Notre Dame, and also 2 years afterward.
Yeah. And even the undergraduate I went to was very general, so I did all the different techniques from egg tempera to etching to engraving, all those. And
his watercolors are beautiful.
No. Yes, and so then when I was teaching, I was like 1 step ahead of my students. And what I loved about art history is that it was such a springboard to all the other disciplines. So that whole thing about, this liberal arts education. And I team taught with the music teacher in this college. I team taught in a humanities course. And I thought, for me particularly, art was my thing, and art was this thing that could connect me to philosophy, music, literature, all that. So I said, why not go on and get a PhD in art history with the idea of teaching? So how fortunate I got a fellowship at Boston University, which brought me to New England for the first time. And then I did my, for 2 years, coursework. And then I lived in Holland for a year, because my field is 17th century Dutch and Flemish art. Then I came back, I was 30 years old, I was broke, and I had a lot of student loans. What do you do then? Well, fortunately, I got another fellowship for three months in Chicago. I got the first fellowship at the Newberry Library for their new center they set up for the study of the history of cartography.
Oh, the map making.
Yeah, and my dissertation was on Vermeer and the map, Vermeer and cartography. So the maps and globes, not only in his paintings, but in all the other Dutch artists who had incorporated maps and globes into their paintings during this golden age of map making and exploration. So that too, in many ways, looking back, had a big influence on me, because I started looking at art history in a more interdisciplinary perspective. For example, I worked a lot with geographers and astronomers even.
Yes.
And
well, art history really covers the gamut of all knowledge.
That's
the beauty. That's the beauty of being in a museum and coming to a museum, is if you really look at the paintings, you learn about everything. You really do.
It is. It's really interdisciplinary. You know?
I was also going to say, you got your doctorate then at BU, right?
Yes.
And I don't think I've ever heard anyone call him Dr. Welu.
That's okay.
He's always Jim.
I don't give shots or anything like that.
No,
so
but it's just significant, I think, very significant.
Well, then when I was at the Newberry Library, I wanted to get back to New England because my advisor was here, and I learned about the job at Worcester, and I knew it had a great Dutch and Flemish collection, but I had never been here. And so I came here in 1974 and started as assistant curator. And then a couple of years later was associate curator and
So that gives you like 36 years at the museum?
That's like 36 years.
Woo!
You do your math well.
36 years, whoa.
Right.
But you didn't become director until you first worked assistant curator and then worked your way up.
That was another big thing for me. Two big, really major decisions in my life was, one, to go from studio to art history, because I was always seen as the artist in my hometown.
A different path.
A different path. And even my parents, when they would come to visit me later on, after I was director here, they would say, when are you going to get serious in being an artist again? So that was a real big decision.
Well, you know, I don't think people realize that not too long ago, art history was not that common a major.
That's true.
It really was
You're
not,
right.
or museum studies and things like that were not,
Right.
they were just developing a lot of these programs.
Yeah. And then the field that I went into, this whole history of cartography, and that was an area that it was very new. I mean, there's now doctorate degrees in that history, but that was new. So it's been fun to be in sort of pioneering areas. But anyway, then I became chief curator in 1980 at the Worcester Art Museum. And when Tom Freudenheim left the museum in '86, many people encouraged me to think about becoming director. But I was 40 years old then, and I thought directors were 50 years old. And I was already thinking about maybe moving on to a bigger museum to head up a major European painting department. And I actually had interviewed at Chicago Art Institute in Montreal. Had asked me to consider there. And then I came back to Worcester, I'll never forget, having done my interview at Chicago, and said, but if there's ever a museum I'd want to direct, it's this museum.
And why was it you fell in love with the Worcester Art Museum?
Well, first of all, it's quality. The quality of the collection is first rate. It's as good as the Louvre, in terms of picture, or the quality. Not maybe as big as some of the biggest museums. And also, I love the encyclopedic nature of our collection. You're always in touch with the whole world and all of civilization. And I really feel that that's what museums do. We carry forth civilization.
Yes.
We carry forth, the visual record, if you will.
That's right.
Not of only the past, but of our own time.
The visual record of the ideas.
That's right.
And the circumstances and the beliefs and all of those things from other cultures, which we can read when we look at the paintings and the other objects.
Exactly. And I think that when I was teaching in college, one step ahead of my students, I could see that because I was discovering art history at that moment, that boy, to unlock these pictures, there's so much to be said and learn from them. If I could play a role in that, it would be wonderful. So that's what we do here at the Worcester Art Museum. We're so fortunate to have inherited a great collection. We continue to add to it, but it was already here. The other thing I loved about this museum is we have a strong conservation program. So as someone who's always made art, I feel that's really important to be able to work hand in hand with conservators to learn about how these objects were made, and which also helps in the interpretation of them. Also having a great studio program here. The community effort here is really dear to my heart.
And the other thing is, it allowed you, I think, to keep your hands on and be involved with the exhibitions and do curating yourself, and you continue to teach while you're here. He's one of the best speakers about art, and people have said that when he takes you through the museum, it opens your eyes like nothing else, and you get a whole new perspective on everything.
Thank
so
you. I'm no different than all of our docents who it's that passion too that excites people.
Now, you are actually moving into a new position as Director Emeritus this coming year. And do you think you will continue to teach then, or what are your...
I will teach until I drop, I think. Even my siblings, my younger sister who is now an international lawyer in London, always said, you were the teacher, you taught us when we were younger. That's just, that's in my nature. I love teaching because, first of all, that's how you learn. And then secondly, you're always in touch with the next generation.
That's right.
And they often ask great questions you don't necessarily have the answer to, but it keeps you learning.
But you also have to clarify ideas about things by putting them into language.
Yes.
And I find it very stimulating myself, although I'm getting a little tired. But I won't stop either. As long as you keep going, I will. So actually, you became the director in 86.
So that's 24 years ago.
That's exactly around the time when I became a faculty member at the Worcester Art Museum. So you have always been my leader.
Well, that was also a major change for the museum, too, regarding our school program here, because, we had a 3-year art school. And then Clark University took it over for 5 years. It was bigger than they really needed as a satellite campus. So when I became director, we had to make a major decision what we were going to do with the Higgins Education Wing. And Honey Hess, our director of education, she was one of my first hires. And we said, look, we've always had part-time youth and adult classes. Let's grow them. And so now instead of like 120 students, for which that wing was really designed, we have over 7,000 people taking art classes.
7,000 people taking art classes at the Worcester Art Museum, and you could be one of them.
Very good. Well, and the other thing,
good courses too.
We love that statistic, but the statistic I love the most is that we have what is probably the largest art scholarship program for an art museum in the world.
It's like 1 in 5 or something?
1 in 5 adults, and 1 out of every 3 children attends free based on need. And we work with about 200 social service agencies, churches, et cetera, who help us to identify kids who would benefit from taking an art class. And I've seen how it just... Wonderful. It's their salvation sometimes.
It's such a wonderful experience for a child to have that exposure and attention and ability to make something and feel proud of what they do. And but you have scholarships for adults as well.
Yes, 1 out of 5. And you've been on the front line, and you see how that works. You were probably like that when you were younger. I was like, I needed art in my life.
I had scholarships all the way through, same thing.
Same, yeah. And we hear all the time from the teachers that when the kids are taking art classes here, they do better in their other studies as well. It makes sense.
They feel good about themselves.
They're expressing themselves. The other side of the brain, everything's working. Everything's clicking.
So the education department has really been one of the strong things in your tenure. What else would you point to as a highlight of your...
Well, and also education has been strong from the very beginning. Worcester was a pioneer in arts education. Other things, we have really strengthened our conservation program. Again, and I'm so proud of the Worcester Art Museum. We've been a pioneer in all the areas that museum work in.
It makes it a complete package.
Yes.
A world-class museum.
Yeah. We're like a mid-sized metropolitan museum, Boston, Louvre, whatever. And another area is conservation. We were a pioneer starting in the 1930s. Worcester was working very closely with Harvard University in pioneering conservation as a modern
science.
Yes, that is relatively recent.
A relatively new career in the arts because now you can study conservation.
And conservation is different from restoration. And
Yes.
people have been restoring works of art since antiquity,
Yes.
but conservation.
Not always in the best way.
No, you're right. Yeah, and they're always.
They were making it up as they went along.
And often could be doing more damage.
Yeah.
Applying materials that might have further damage.
Yeah.
But part of the role of a conservator is to lengthen the life of a work
Yes.
of art. So here, one of the things we're very proud of, which has happened more recently, we now have a scientist on our staff. Right, thanks to major funding nationally, the Mellon Foundation. And we also have 2 Mellon Fellows here, so our conservation program has really grown. I'm very proud of that because I think the future, so much of learning more about objects is in that conservation lab. With modern technologies, we get beneath the surface, we see it in different lights, we can record, we can just analyze so much better than we could do even 30 or 40 years ago.
That's right.
And we were a pioneer.
A lot of the conservation is really reversible. I know a lot of the things they're saying, they don't want to do anything that is not reversible because techniques in the future will be so much more refined. Well, I think maybe we should look at a couple of the paintings. You were talking about conservation. Maybe we should look at the Del Sarto.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you.
Now, this painting has a very interesting history. This is the Del Sarto, and could you tell us how this came to be in your possession?
Well, this is a wonderful, exciting moment in my life and for the museum in that this is a very unusual painting to have in America because there are only 5 examples of his work in America. Andrea Del Sarto was the leading painter in Florence during the High Renaissance after Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael had gone off to Rome. So most of his work are in Europe, and specifically in Florence, his hometown. And believe it or not, this painting was sitting on the floor of a church in Worcester in 1977 when I was called in to look at some paintings that were going to be in this church auction. And my heart started beating, and the rest is history. And I did trace the history of this painting. It was brought to America by Boston's first millionaire, Peter Chardon Brooks. It was exhibited at the Boston Athenaeum. It was exhibited at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts twice. It was even brought into the Worcester Art Museum. The attribution was changed. It had a rocky road. It ended up in a home in Worcester for about 20 years, and then on the floor of the church for 20 years.
Isn't that wonderful that he had the eye to be able to recognize this masterpiece? When you look at, it's a John the Baptist, by the way, and the flesh tones are just so fabulous, and you feel like you could pinch him.
Well, and I should say, Suzanne, he didn't look like this when I found him. The varnish on it was very dark and discolored.
Oh, so you really had to see through all of that.
Well, but there were some clues. There's what we call pentimento. I could see some changes that the artist had made.
Yes.
And that was all helpful in...
Now, the science of the conservation, and how did that play a part?
Well, I brought it to our lab right away, and we took off the back, and I found all these labels on the back that enabled me to trace that history I just referred to briefly. In fact, just going right into our basement, I found when it was brought in here, and the attribution was changed from Sarto to
But did they actually X-ray it at one point?
Well,
or
we did then here, but X-ray unfortunately didn't show anything because it was transferred from panel to canvas, which is a very complicated process. But in doing so, this Boston restorer who did this used lead white, so we just got a blank. But infrared photography did reveal beautiful underdrawing throughout.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Infrared had to go through the lead white ground to reveal the ancient past of this painting.
Yes, because the artist uses a charcoal to work with, and infrared photography shows that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, yeah, it was an exciting moment. And then what was also wonderful, we worked with the church. It took a couple of years to arrange to get it cleaned. We did that. Then we put it on loan with the first refusal to buy it. So we raised money in the community here. If one looks at the label, you'll see names of generous donors.
By sort of renting it out to other museums in a way.
Well, no. We just asked local families if they would contribute money toward our purchase of this work of art.
I see. When you said we put it out on loan, I wasn't sure what
Oh,
you
no.
meant.
It was put on loan to the Worcester Art Museum in 1980.
I see.
And then we acquired it in 1984.
Okay.
Yeah.
let's look at another one because I know we have so little time.
Okay.
Now here's a colossal painting that I'm sure you'll find interesting. What's the scoop on this one, Jim?
Well, this is Lady Warwick and her son, and this painting came into the museum early in its history, and it's by John Singer Sargent, who has had a long relationship with this museum. In fact, he came to Worcester in the summer of 1890, before there was a Worcester Art Museum, and painted portraits of 8 of the leading citizens. And then one of our early trustees took painting lessons from him in his backyard over on West Street, right?
Yeah.
And then they remained in touch with Sargent, and then they wanted to get a great painting. And this had rather an interesting history in that they got in touch with Sargent's dealer, and he said, well, Lady Warwick is wanting to sell her portrait. And you wouldn't know this looking at this painting, but she got very interested in raising money for the working class. And so she was selling these treasures out of Warwick Castle. And so when Worcester bought the painting, our first director, it was a very embarrassing moment for him because the Worcester Art Museum was accused of stealing a national treasure from England.
My goodness.
Even though they had gone through all the right channels. In fact, everyone apologized to our director afterwards, including Sargent, because they put him in touch with Lady Warwick.
Yeah.
The bottom line is that the museum was able to keep the painting, and it's had a really interesting life here. It was the cat's meow when everyone came to see it because it was one of the great Sargents in New England.
A real draw.
A real draw. And then, you probably are aware of this, after Sargent died and abstract art came in the middle of the 20th century, he was no longer in favor. And this painting ended up in the basement. Even the frame was separated into 4 pieces. And it was resurrected for an exhibition in the early 70s. And then when I came here, we needed a replacement for a picture that was going on loan. And we brought it up to the gallery, put the frame back together, and it's been here in the gallery ever since.
Well, it has such a grandeur about it. I'd like to point out for those of you who do figure drawing that, you know, the usual 7 heads, or more likely 6 heads for a lot of people. This painting, if you measured the elegant height of this woman, just makes her so statuesque. And of course, that's why Sargent was criticized for making everyone look so elegant and royal, and
well, and
catering to
Lady
the wealthy.
Warwick was not a tall woman. In fact, one of the people on the collections committee at the time was not so in favor of buying this work. I think they thought it was too expensive at the time, and that it made Lady Warwick look like a giantess, in which she wasn't.
She looks very, very formidable.
Yeah.
I also think if we could show that beautiful brushwork of Sargent's, the way he tackles that satin dress with that flamboyant brushwork of his, which just glistens in space. It's marvelous.
Yes, and this painting has just undergone a treatment in our conservation lab. It was lent to the big show at the Brooklyn Museum, Sargent and Children, so it came back and we put it on view now. So people are seeing it afresh. Beauty.
It's a real beauty. Mm-hmm. Now this is a Judith Leister painting, very interesting history for a woman painter. And I remember when the Judith Leister show was here. Could you tell us about some of her history?
Sure. That show was in 1993, and it was her first show ever. And
you put that together?
We did, with a team of scholars, 12 people from around the world, particularly from Holland and the U.S. And it's an exhibition that was a landmark show in that Leister is considered Holland's most famous woman painter from the Golden Age. So she would be a contemporary of Rembrandt.
17th century?
17th century, yeah. Rembrandt, Vermeer, Hals. And, but from the time she died until the end of the 19th century, 1893, all of her works were attributed to her husband or other male artists. And then in 1893, an art historian saw her signature on some paintings and wrote an article. And then for the next 100 years, she became sort of a dumping ground for works that were thought to be by Howells and other male masters. So by the end of the 20th century, there was the first book came out on her, and we thought, well, why not do an exhibition? Because I had worked with a local family who bought this painting and put it on loan, and 2 years later gave it to us, the Cushman family. So it was a wonderful gift.
And Jim is a master of building the collection in that way. He's, just because everybody loves him, and then they
thank you.
well, have a way of telling people what could be good. And
well, it also speaks to the generosity of this local community, because you know, so much art has been given to this museum, and it's a great place for it to reside. But in any case, we did this exhibition, and we showed Judith Leister in the context of her male contemporaries. You know, even when she was a teenager, she was referred to as a leading star. And yet, when she married her husband, Jan Meens Molenaar, another leading star, and they went off from Haarlem to Amsterdam to raise their family, she spent the rest of her life managing his business, it appears. So most of her work, the bulk of it, comes from before their marriage. And there are only less than 24 works by her, so we're fortunate to have this work. And it was really a wonderful moment to give her her first show. She's already had her second show, the National Gallery and her hometown museum, the Franz Hals Museum.
So you really rediscovered her.
We rediscovered her, right. I mean, we didn't do alone. As I said, I implied in the 20th century, scholars were starting to sort her out. And of course, with the women's movement, she became a real heroine of that, because there aren't many women artists of the earlier period, and she's pretty exceptional.
That we're known. It's a wonderful field that you've chosen, and I wish we could go on and show 5 more paintings, but I have the feeling that we're running out of time. But
well, people can come to the museum and see more paintings.
I do feel that this experience for me has been one of really celebrating your long history here at the museum, and I just would like to thank you for all you have contributed to this city and to the lives of the people in this area. You've been a wonderful master at the helm, and I remember how important the museum has been to me. When I first came to Worcester, I came to the museum and I thought, whoa, I could live here. I felt right at home.
We could get you a bed here, right?
Yeah, and I know you've loved the museum, and that has come through so strongly to the community. And the other thing I have to say is he's probably the hardest working guy I've ever seen. I would come in at night for a night class, and I would see you sitting at your desk as I went in the Lancaster Street entrance, and when I left, he was still at his desk. And yet, he has time to show up at every Arts Worcester event, every faculty show, the student shows, all kinds of art events around the community. So
well, thank you.
I take my hat off to you. I don't know how you do it.
I shouldn't say anything more after you said that. I just want to say, but it's been the pleasure. It has not been work for me. It has been the biggest joy, because that's what I was cut out to do.
Yeah, well, it shows. Thanks a million for having us today. I really appreciate it.